Hello, Alan Wheeler here. Sorry for the short delay. I'd like to make a short video uh, today, probably pretty short, and the title will be something like the Deviant Moon Tarot uh, helps us love what we hate. And what I'm talking about is facing fears or overcoming aversions. Um, and I'll try to give some examples by way of introduction. Uh, I've I'm here at the office at the end of the workday, and when I'm recording at home, I usually show something from my altar. I also have a altar here. Hang on. And there's maybe a glimpse of that altar there. And just today, I put this offering here for the goddess. So one big example of kind of having to come to grips with something I had an aversion to happened when I was 30 years old. And during my 20s, I was, most of that time, I was identified as an atheist, self-declared atheist, and pretty well had an aversion to even the word Christian. And toward the end of that decade, I began drinking so much and was in such a state of disillusion and discouragement that in despair, one night I told some friends I just wanted to quit drinking. And without going into all the details of my kind of shipwrecked life at the time, one of the guys at the bar said, "Oh, I know a great place that did wonders for me," he said as he drank his beer. But these guys took up a collection and put me in a cab, and about 20 miles outside of the city, they sent me to a rehabilitation center where I rode happily until I saw the sign at the entrance of a long driveway there in the countryside, and it said Christian Rehabilitation Center, and I recoiled. So I remember that distinctly, and the next day I talked to a counselor there who said, we don't, will not pressure you to believe anything, we just ask that you keep an open mind. So I relaxed, and it was a turning point in my life. So although I had an aversion to sobriety, responsibility, and religion, those desperate circumstances opened me up and allowed me to access that realm of life. Now, through my Christian training, over many years, I began to have a different aversion, and some years ago, my family and I would not even watch Harry Potter movies. And although I performed magic tricks and illusions as a hobby, I thought tarot cards were evil, and Wicca, paganism, and things like that I had been taught were spawns of the devil. And so in more recent years, I've expanded my thinking and come to understand those things much more. and kind of broken through the stereotypes and preconceptions to come to an understanding of those things. An interesting kind of reverse or inverted example of this kind of change of heart or breakthrough is seen in the tarot of vampires, tarot cards of all things. And many of the vampires are pictured in those cards wearing crosses or in close proximity of crosses. And a friend of mine and I at the Cartomancy Forum, who discussed that deck, speculated that they're overcoming their fears and their aversions, kind of in the reverse, kind of a reversal of me overcoming the just the opposite, the coming to understand the beauty and value of the dark imagery and the darker practices. So I pulled one rune and three tarot cards that I'm going to show in the Deviant Moon Tarot, just as a way of reflecting on this question. How is it that we go through this kind of transformation of coming to accept what we have aversions to, and how to think about this? And the rune that I drew, if I can find it here, I drew it out so you could see it more clearly, was manes, which means identity, or what makes us who we are, what makes something what it is. And this spoke to me fairly quickly, almost instantly, that sometimes we feel our identity is threatened, I think. And so if it's something that we don't take personally, like politics and religion, which we commonly think of as being volatile topics, something that's close to how we see ourselves, who we are, can get these kind of visceral reactions. And so I thought that was a very appropriate rune to draw. The first tarot card I drew was the Nine of Cups. And here's how it's pictured in the Deviant Moon Tarot. And here the figure has found a lamp on the beach and started rubbing it in his excitement. And here a genie appears with empty cups swirling around him. And it's kind of a interesting spin on what is sometimes called the wish fulfillment card in tarot. And I think it's the dark side of this card actually that comes into play in some of the stories of wishes that backfire when what we think we want and wish for that we'll be fulfilling is actually detrimental. And there's the story of the monkey's paw. You can Google that if you're not familiar with that short story, but the story of the fisherman and his wife, or the many examples when magic is used selfishly and it backfires. And this reminds me of, in the case of my drinking, what I thought would bring me happiness ended up destroying my life. So we don't, one of the problems is that we through training or whatever way, we acquire these knee-jerk reactions and aversions, these preconceptions or prejudices, and actually they're doing the opposite of what we intend. And so I think this dark version of the card asks us to look at what is it we're wishing, what is it we think we're wanting, and what causes whether it's homophobia or whatever kind of stereotype is going on. The next card I drew was the Star. And this one, even though the picture drawn by Patrick Valenza is a little bit non-traditional, I'm kind of reading it in the normal sense of the card as that light which guides us through the night, through the darkness, that kind of faith or hope or refreshing of the dry landscape that we see here as the figure pours out the water. That kind of that familiar significance of the card, of the Star card. But we may, in these certain areas where it does feel dark, we don't feel we understand something, we feel that aversion. We may need to let trust in another person, hope in the other person or the other area, kind of take us through that darkness. And I suppose in the Christmas season, the wise men being led by the star to something that was outside of their scope, might be a good image for that. The last card I drew was the Hierophant. And we get this very disturbing image of this ecclesiastical figure in the Deviant Moon. And the description is just as disturbing as the artwork here. The Hierophant represents an old philosophy that needs to be re-examined. Challenge outdated traditions. Think for yourself. Any thought that limits your freedom or your happiness must be called into question. Fearlessly explore the established principles that have manipulated your life. Do not allow your mind to conform to the will of others. So while in some cases following conventions may be helpful, we get that warning not to let that rule over us. And so the high priestess who seeks within and the Hierophant who is the outward expression of spiritual things balance each other, and the warning here is against that extreme of just doing what following the rigid guidelines that have been imposed. So this works whether you're a vampire and you have aversion to the cross, or whether you are the religious person who has an aversion to the vampire. I think this is good advice to examine what you're taking personally, how we identify ourselves, what we're wishing for actually, and following the faith and the hope in one another, and not being locked in to rigid and kind of prejudiced conventions, whatever group that might be. So I'll stop there. That's some good food for thought for me. Thank you for watching here at the office with me. And as always, I hope you'll feel connection with people in your life, in your day-to-day life, with online community, and on your spiritual path, whatever that may be. Thank you for watching.